All right, so get ready because we're going deep on this one.
Oh, yeah.
This story sounds like something right out of a political thriller. You
Yeah.
know, we're talking about Donald Trump's nomination of Pete Hegseth,
Right.
the Fox News host,
To be Secretary of
to
Defense.
be the Secretary of Defense.
Wow.
Um,
It's
our main source
It's a doozy.
for this deep dive is an AP News article.
Yeah.
It's called Trump Pentagon Pick Had Been Flagged by Fellow Service Member as Possible Insider Threat. And this article lays out some pretty surprising details about Hegseth's past and his views on the military.
Yeah.
So by the end of this,
For sure.
you'll have a much clearer picture of this whole situation.
Yeah, much clearer picture.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So first things first,
Right.
who is Pete Hegseth?
Right.
The article paints a picture of a decorated soldier,
Yeah.
an Army National Guard veteran with deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo Bay.
Wow.
He even received 2 Bronze Stars.
So on paper,
Yeah,
it looks impressive.
right.
But the article also dives into his transition
Okay.
from a military career to a Fox News host.
Yeah.
And that's where things get a little
Yeah, it gets a little dicey.
more complicated.
And this is what makes the nomination by Donald Trump for Secretary of Defense
Yeah.
all the more surprising.
Surprising to say the least.
To say the least, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that really stood out to me in this article was Hegseth's downplaying of the role of military personnel and veterans
Okay.
in the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
Oh, wow.
He even goes so far as to call the issue of extremism within the military
Right.
fake and manufactured.
Fake and manufactured.
Yeah,
That's a pretty bold claim,
it is.
especially considering the findings
Right.
of a very comprehensive investigation by the Associated Press,
Right.
which revealed that a significant number of individuals with military backgrounds were involved
Yeah.
in the January 6th insurrection.
Yeah, it makes you wonder
Oh.
if he's trying to minimize the problem or if he truly doesn't grasp the severity of it.
Yeah.
And it's not just something he said offhand
Yeah.
in his book, The War on Warriors.
Okay.
Hegseth really goes after the Pentagon's efforts to address extremism.
He does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He paints this picture of a war on warriors, claiming that it's all a big lie to target patriots.
Interesting.
He even wrote,
Okay.
America is less safe, and our generals simply do not care about the oath that they swore to uphold.
Wow.
The generals are too busy assessing how domestic extremists wearing Carhartt jackets
Hard jacket.
will usurp our democracy with gate barriers or flagpoles.
Wow.
That's a quote from the book.
That's strong language.
Yeah.
Especially coming from
Right.
someone who might be in charge of the entire U.S. military.
Right.
Yeah, it's incredibly concerning.
It is.
Yeah.
It feeds into this narrative that paints anyone trying to address extremism within the military as the enemy,
Yeah.
which can be very divisive and dangerous.
Right.
And then there's a whole issue
Right.
of Hegseth's Doisvelt tattoo.
Yeah.
This is where things get really interesting and frankly quite disturbing.
Okay.
The article reveals that a fellow service member flagged Hegseth as a potential insider threat
Oh, wow.
because of this tattoo.
Really?
Deus Vult, meaning God wills it in Latin,
Right.
has been adopted and used by various white supremacist groups,
This is unsettling,
which is a bit unsettling,
to say the least.
to say the least.
Yeah.
This detail really makes you think about the broader context
It does.
of Hegseth's nomination.
Yeah.
We're seeing a rise in extremist ideologies globally.
Right.
And the idea of someone with even a tenuous connection to such symbols leading the U.S. military
Right.
is deeply unsettling.
Is
It raises questions about
how effectively the DOD can combat extremism within its own ranks if its leader potentially harbors such sympathies.
especially considering
Right.
Hegseth claims he was pulled from guarding Biden's inauguration
Oh, really?
because of a cross tattoo on his chest.
Okay.
But this email from his fellow service member
Yeah,
reveals a different concern altogether.
it does.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The email specifically mentions the Deus Vult tattoo.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder if Hegseth is trying to downplay the situation or distract from a potentially more serious issue.
Yeah.
It definitely raises questions
It does.
about his transparency and his motivations.
Just transparency in his motivations, for sure.
And it's not the only red flag
Okay.
when it comes to Hegseth's judgment.
Yeah.
The article also discusses his open support for military members convicted of war crimes.
So not only did he
Wait.
advocate for pardons from Trump
Right.
for these individuals,
He advocated for presidential pardons.
but he also expressed pride for convicted war criminals.
In securing those pardons.
It's important to remember that these pardons that he helped secure weren't for like minor offenses.
Right.
We're talking about cases involving the killing of unarmed civilians.
Right.
His actions suggest a disregard for the principles of accountability and justice that are supposed to be at the core of the military justice system.
Which is incredibly troubling when you consider he might be leading the entire Department of Defense.
Yeah, and then you have his comments about rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean where he admitted to telling his platoon to disregard the rules of engagement?
Yes.
That limited when they could shoot.
That's the one.
Wow.
He even said he would have their back if they did.
Really?
He actually said, I remember walking out of that briefing, pulling my platoon together and being like, guys, we're not doing that. You know, like if you see an enemy and they, you know, engage before he's able to point his weapon at you and shoot.
Okay.
We're going to have your back. Rules of engagement are there for a reason.
They are.
They're designed to minimize civilian casualties and ensure military actions are carried out lawfully and ethically. Encouraging soldiers to disregard those rules shows a complete lack of understanding of the complexities of warfare and to justify it. He said all they do is take one incident and yell war criminal, referring to the New York Times, the left and Democrats.
Oh, wow.
Adding, why wouldn't we back these guys up even if they weren't perfect?
So that statement reveals a deep distrust of accountability mechanisms and prioritizes loyalty over justice. It's a mindset that's worrisome for someone who might be responsible for leading the entire U.S. military. So we have a complex picture emerging here. With Hegseth downplaying extremism, supporting war criminals, and potentially having ties to white supremacy. And this is the person being considered to lead the Department of Defense.
It's definitely a lot to unpack.
It is.
And it begs the question.
It does.
What does this all mean for the future of the military?
Yeah, the potential implications are significant.
They are.
It raises questions about the military's future direction, adherence to the rule of law, and its commitment to addressing extremism.
And remember, this is all coming from just one source.
That's right.
The AP News article.
Yeah.
There might be even more to uncover.
There might be.
About Hegseth and his views.
Yeah.
But even with what we have now, it's clear that this is a controversial figure and a nomination that deserves careful scrutiny.
Absolutely. It's a story with many layers. And we need to dig deeper to fully understand the potential consequences.
For sure.
We've been exploring some pretty alarming details about this guy, Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
And his nominations for Secretary of Defense.
It's a complex story.
It is.
With a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah. But even with what we know now,
right,
it's clear that Hegseth represents a particular worldview.
Okay.
One that seems skeptical of established institutions, including the military justice system. And perhaps even sympathetic to certain fringe ideologies.
And that's what makes this potential appointment so unsettling.
It is.
The Secretary of Defense holds a tremendous amount of power. Not just over the military itself, but over national security policy as a whole.
Absolutely. Think about it.
Right.
This is the person advising the president on matters of war and peace. The person responsible for overseeing the deployment of troops. And the use of military force.
It's a big job.
This role demands the highest levels of integrity, judgment, and commitment to the rule of law.
And yet, so much of what we've learned about Hegseth seems to contradict those very principles.
It does.
His comments about ignoring rules of engagement, for instance. That's not just reckless, it's potentially criminal.
It is.
And his defense of those convicted war criminals raises serious concerns about his respect for international law and human rights.
It's a disturbing pattern.
Yeah.
And it's hard to ignore the potential consequences of having someone with these views at the helm of the Pentagon.
If he's willing to dismiss rules of engagement and pardon war criminals, what other norms and laws might he be willing to disregard?
Exactly.
What kind of message does that send to the rank and file, to our allies and to our adversaries?
It raises those questions, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not just about Hegseth as an individual.
Right.
It's about what his nomination represents.
Okay.
It reflects the deep political divisions within the country and the growing influence of extremist ideologies.
This whole situation really highlights how high the stakes are.
They are.
Decisions made at the Pentagon have a profound impact.
They do.
On millions of lives, both at home and abroad.
Absolutely.
Those decisions should be based on sound judgment, informed by facts and evidence, not on political expediency or personal biases.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
This nomination demands careful scrutiny and critical thinking.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric and the partisan divides.
Right.
But we need to look beyond the surface and ask ourselves, what are the potential consequences of this appointment?
Right.
What does it say about our values as a nation?
Yeah.
Are we truly prepared for the risks involved?
It's a lot to process.
It is.
For sure.
But I think that's the essence of what we're doing here.
Okay.
Confronting uncomfortable truths, challenging our own assumptions, and trying to gain a deeper understanding of the issues at hand.
One thing that really struck me was Hegseth's dismissal of the Pentagon's efforts to address extremism within the military. He calls it a fake problem.
Right.
A political witch hunt targeting patriots.
What's fascinating here is that this stance aligns with a broader narrative that's gaining traction among certain segments of the population. The idea that any attempt to address systemic issues, whether it's racism, extremism, or inequality, is somehow an attack on traditional values and a betrayal of American patriotism.
It creates this false dichotomy.
It does.
You're either a true patriot who turns a blind eye to these problems, or you're some kind of woke liberal out to destroy the country.
It's such a dangerous oversimplification.
It is.
Acknowledging and addressing these issues doesn't make you less patriotic. In fact, it's arguably the opposite. True patriotism requires facing up to our shortcomings, holding ourselves accountable, and striving to create a more just and equitable society.
Ignoring or downplaying these problems only makes them worse in the long run.
Exactly.
And when it comes to extremism within the military, the stakes are particularly high.
They are.
We're talking about an institution entrusted with immense power and responsibility. The presence of extremist ideologies within its ranks poses a threat not only to national security, but to the very fabric of our democracy.
It's a threat we can't afford to ignore.
We can't.
Which is why the Pentagon's efforts to address it are so crucial.
Yeah, and those efforts require leadership.
They do.
That recognizes the gravity of the problem and is committed to addressing it head on, not dismissing it as a political fabrication from what we've seen so far. It's hard to imagine Hegseth being that kind of leader.
His statements and actions do suggest a lack of understanding. Or perhaps even a willingness to overlook the dangers posed by extremism.
It's definitely a red flag that shouldn't be ignored.
It is.
We've talked about his views on extremism, his support for war criminals, and his disregard for rules of engagement. But there's another piece of the puzzle that's been nagging at me. That Deus Vult tattoo.
You're right to bring that up. It's a detail that deserves closer attention, as we mentioned earlier. Deus Vult has been adopted by various white supremacist groups. While it's possible Hegseth is unaware of this association. It's hard to believe someone with his military background and public profile wouldn't have encountered it.
Even if he isn't intentionally aligning himself with white supremacist ideology, the fact that he has this tattoo raises questions about his judgment.
It does.
And his awareness of the potential impact of his actions.
Symbols matter. They carry meaning and weight. And they can be interpreted in different ways when you're a public figure, especially one being considered for a position of power. You have a responsibility to be mindful of the messages you're sending. Both intentionally and unintentionally.
And in this case, the message is, at the very least, ambiguous.
It is.
And troubling.
It demands further scrutiny and explanation. What does this tattoo mean to Hegseth? Why did he choose to get it? What does it say about his worldview and his potential fitness for the role of Secretary of Defense?
These are questions that need to be answered.
They do.
Until we have those answers. It's hard to shake the feeling that something's not quite right here.
There's a sense of unease.
Yeah.
A feeling that this goes beyond mere political disagreement.
Right.
We're grappling with fundamental questions of values, ethics, and the very soul of our nation.
And those questions demand our full attention and careful consideration.
They do?
Because the stakes couldn't be higher. The future of the Department of Defense, and indeed the future of our country, may very well hinge on the answers we find.
Another aspect of this story that I think is worth exploring is Hegseth's take on civilian control of the military.
That's a crucial element.
It is.
Especially given his skepticism of established institutions and authority.
It makes you wonder how he views the balance of power between civilian leaders and the military.
The idea of civilian control of the military is really at the heart of American democracy.
It is.
It's a safeguard against the concentration of power and ensures that the military is ultimately accountable to the people, not just to its own leadership. So how might someone like Hegseth, who seems to have a somewhat authoritarian bent, approach this principle? Could we see a shift in that balance of power if he were to become Secretary of Defense?
Those are definitely questions worth considering.
Yeah.
Hegseth has praised strongman leaders in the past and expressed admiration for their decisiveness and willingness to define norms.
It makes you wonder if he sees a similar role for himself within the American system.
It's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
And if that were to happen, it could have significant consequences for the future of American democracy.
This deep dive is giving us a lot to think about.
It is.
It's a reminder that we can't take these principles for granted.
We can't.
We need to be vigilant and make sure we understand the implications of the choices our leaders make.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We can't afford to be complacent.
No.
We need to engage in these conversations. Ask tough questions. And hold our leaders accountable.
So we've been unpacking a lot about Pete Hegseth and his nomination as Secretary of Defense.
We have.
It's raised a lot of eyebrows.
It had.
And sparked some serious debate.
For sure.
I think it's important to step back.
Yeah.
And look at the bigger picture here. What does this nomination tell us about the state of American politics?
That's a great question.
You know, if we connect this back to the broader context, Hegseth's nomination could be seen as part of a larger trend of anti-establishment sentiment and the rise of figures who challenge traditional norms and institutions.
We've witnessed this play out in various ways in recent years. From the questioning of scientific consensus to the erosion of trust in the media.
Yeah, it's like this wave of disillusionment with the status quo. People feel like the system isn't working for them anymore.
That feeling is understandable. But the danger is that this disillusionment can be exploited by those who offer simplistic solutions and scapegoats.
It's a slippery slope.
It is.
And it's particularly concerning when it comes to something as crucial as national security.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Department of Defense isn't just another government agency.
It's responsible for protecting the country from both external and internal threats.
That's right. And it requires leadership that is grounded in reality, not ideology. Leadership that understands the complexities of the world and the importance of working with allies and international institutions.
Hegseth's views and actions, based on what we've discussed, suggest a disregard for those principles.
It seems like it.
He seems to prioritize loyalty over competence. And his rhetoric often fuels division rather than unity.
If he were to be confirmed, what might the potential implications be?
Well, it's hard to predict with certainty.
Sure.
But there are a few key areas where we could see significant shifts.
Like what?
For instance, there's the potential for a more isolationist foreign policy. One that's less focused on diplomacy and multilateralism and more inclined towards unilateral action.
That could put a strain on relationships with our allies?
And make it harder to address global challenges. Like climate change and terrorism. And we could also see a weakening of civilian control over the military.
That's a core principle of American democracy.
And it is.
The idea that the military is ultimately accountable to civilian leaders.
Absolutely. It's a crucial safeguard against the concentration of power. If that principle erodes, it could have serious consequences for the balance of power within our government.
And then there's the possibility of a more aggressive and militaristic approach to foreign policy.
Which could increase the risk of conflict.
It could.
And undermine efforts to promote peace and stability around the world.
These are all pretty sobering possibilities.
They are. But it's important to remember that these are just potential scenarios.
Right.
The actual outcome will depend on many factors, including the actions of Congress, the response of the international community, and the decisions made by Hegseth himself, if he's confirmed.
So what should we, as informed citizens, be watching for in the coming weeks and months?
The confirmation process will be crucial. Senators will have the opportunity to question Hegseth about his views and his record, and assess his fitness for the role. It's important for the public to pay close attention to these hearings and to make their voices heard.
It sounds like we're heading into uncharted territory.
In many ways we are. But I believe that by engaging in thoughtful discussions, asking tough questions, and holding our leaders accountable, we can navigate these challenges and ensure that our democracy remains strong.
Well, we've only scratched the surface of this complex issue.
For sure.
But I hope this deep dive has encouraged you to learn more and to stay engaged. The future of the Department of Defense, and indeed the future of our country, depends on informed and active citizens like you.
Well said. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.